I went through all 32 NFL teams to figure out exactly how each coach affects your fantasy football team. Today's episode, the Jacksonville Jaguars. So take a seat, class is in session. First, we need to identify if any of the coaches have changed, and in this case, they have not. We still have an offensively minded program with Doug Peterson and Press Taylor leading the offense. Both of their specialties is in QBs. Doug Peterson's specialty with quarterbacks is seen by his time with the Eagles, the Chiefs, and now the Jags. Press Taylor is primarily known for his work with quarterbacks from his time with the Eagles and now the Jags. Mike Caldwell, he's our defensive guy, and he specializes in inside linebackers. This team didn't really lose too much in the offseason, and appear to have filled the gaps overall via free agency, and in theory the draft. Now that we've laid the foundation for exactly how the Jacksonville Jaguars have attacked this offseason, we can start to dive into exactly how it impacts our fantasy football teams. But before we do that, we need to check with the guys upstairs to see exactly how they have the Jacksonville Jaguars projected to go about the season so we can give our knowledge a little bit more structure. The Jags, as expected, are supposed to be absolutely elite this year. The Jaguars are currently projected to get somewhere between 9 and 10 wins, and considering they're supposed to be absolutely elite this year, this makes a lot of sense. I mean, the competition is extremely easy, and it's to no surprise that we're all likely going to have the Jags taking first in the AFC South. I thought they might have an easier strength of schedule, but looking at it, it's actually a little bit more difficult than I initially thought. There's a genuine reality we could see Trevor Lawrence being the QB1 based off of this formula, but we'll see exactly how that goes. But now that we've got a really strong understanding of the general direction in which the Jacksonville Jaguars are built towards this season, we can start to identify exactly how Doug Peterson and Press Taylor actually affect our fantasy football teams. So, starting off with the quarterback, Trevor Lawrence. Generational prospect who we should really expect another nice leap from this year. This overall trend seems to be relatively flat, but I think we're going to see Trevor Lawrence take another step forward this year. My only kind of hindrance is the potential game scripts that aren't going to be favoring them as much as people would like to think. Trevor can most certainly run the ball, but I think the overall consensus thought process here is that he's a better passer than he is a runner. If I'm wrong on that, please correct me. These trends also seem relatively flat for me, but they also look like they're kind of breaking into an uptrend here based entirely on talent more than anything. Receiving upgrades on top of theoretically better line, realistically going off the charts here, and considering that I think that Trevor Lawrence is going to go in an uptrend, I think a 20-point basis for him is a very safe floor this year. Trevor Lawrence does have a very nice formula to be the overall fantasy QB1 this year, but I just don't think that's how the story is going to go. I also don't think the matchup is as ideal as people want in Week 17 for him when they really want him to play well. Considering how bullish I am on the Jags this year, if they're theoretically first in that division and just so far ahead, I don't see why they would really push Trevor Lawrence to go crazy in Week 17. You feel me? Like, make sure he stays healthy for the playoffs when you really need him. Utilizing that as a strong segue to talk about the RB1, we're going to talk about Travis Etienne. Cross-referencing fantasy production here doesn't look like the overall most optimistic scenario, and based on what we've seen from Travis Etienne, it kind of fits in line with him as well. I'm assuming 14 to 15 fantasy points per game makes a lot of sense here, in which they're also going to be in a very nice kind of game script scenario. We're also kind of seeing a budding, emerging uptrend here, but I'm just not super optimistic about Travis Etienne himself. He most certainly had some amazing games, but as Steve Smith Sr. is already a little bit bearish on him, it does make me wonder, okay, why is he potentially against him? Not saying that Steve Smith is actually against him, it's just more the question of, like, from an NFL logic standpoint, he's going, you know what, I think Travis Etienne might be on the outs. I think Travis Etienne might be a little overpriced, but I do think there's also a reality where he's an absolute smash hit this year. I mean, he did have some 20-plus fantasy point games last year, which is very nice to see. But moving over to the RB2, and that is theoretically going to be Tank Bigsby. This is also where I kind of draw some of my concern. The RB2 here looks to be on a complete uptrend. And I honestly wouldn't be surprised if Tank ends up being kind of their goal line back. I know we're all kind of sitting here as fantasy managers looking at the metrics for Travis Etienne, and he's like, hey, he's going to be amazing, he's going to pop off, yada, yada, yada. And realistically, I'm not going to fade that take too much because I think it's realistically smart to kind of follow that line of logic. Like, Travis Etienne has an amazing setup, especially from a game script standpoint. If they're winning more games, he should theoretically be performing really well. But I'm personally not too much out on Tank Bigsby either. Like, a 9 fantasy point per game average makes a lot of sense here. Hopefully nothing happens to Travis Etienne, but if something does, Tank Bigsby has a great runway to become an actual RB1 in this offense. I don't know, I feel like we've all kind of heard that Tank Bigsby is going to be utilized in this offense. And when you have positive run scripts and a theoretical RB2 that's in an uptrend, he could have a very strong path for being the RB1 in this offense. I don't know, we'll see. There's a decent chance that Travis Etienne just holds the job out the whole entire year, but I think Tank Bigsby is an elite handcuff option at the bare minimum. Who knows, maybe this is like a Jamal Williams, DeAndre Swift kind of situation. Move over to the wide receiver 1, and that theoretically is going to be Calvin Ridley based on draft placement. Now, at this time, do we really know who's actually going to be the true wide receiver 1 in this offense? No. A lot of people are leaning towards Calvin Ridley being that guy, and it does make a lot of sense here. I mean, realistically, this offense should just be so much better. But I'm not entirely convinced that there's going to be enough positive game scripts to where Trevor Lawrence is basically getting in throwing matches with other quarterbacks. But I could easily be wrong on that as well. Cross-referencing the data based on production, I think a 15 fantasy point floor makes a lot of sense here, which means he's probably a bit overpriced in where he's going in drafts. Now, do I think they could easily break out of this trend? 100%. Trevor Lawrence is a generational prospect, and on top of that, he's got 2 top-tier talents in wide receivers. But I'm not going to be as egregious as other people in saying that he's going to be guaranteeing them 70-plus fantasy point floors. Is it possible? 100%. But I'm not going to just put my take out there like that just yet. Moving over to the wide receiver 2, and that's either going to be Christian Kirk or Calvin Ridley. I'm not convinced it's going to be Calvin Ridley just yet. That's why I'm kind of flip-flopping it here. I think a 13 fantasy point floor makes a lot of sense here because realistically, we're probably going to put that wide receiver 1 more towards like a 16 fantasy point floor. I just think that there's no way that this doesn't continue an uptrend. And there's a reality where both of the wide receiver 1 and wide receiver 2 could be top 10 wide receivers this year together. We're realistically just trying to gauge how well is Trevor Lawrence going to do as a quarterback in this coming year. Moving over to the wide receiver 3, and that is Zay Jones. Now, this spot is not most certainly the most optimistic, but if you're looking for a theoretically really strong spike guy, I think Zay Jones could be your guy. An 8 fantasy point floor makes a lot of sense here. It's not egregious, it's not too high, it's not too low, it's just nice in the middle. And I'm pretty confident that we all think that the volume's truly going to run through Calvin Ridley and Christian Kirk, so we really don't think the wide receiver 3 is going to be involved nearly as much. But if you want to take a deep shot on somebody who's going to theoretically have a strong spike week, Zay Jones is probably a good guy to go after. Moving over to the tight end 1, and that is Evan Ingram. I mean, this is a guy that could theoretically take another leap forward easily. Basically stating that a lot of these pieces are going to get better together, in which case that's going to have a strong correlation across the board. Well, not everyone can average 15 plus fantasy points, right? And if we're going off the coaching totals here, then realistically like 11 to 12 fantasy point range, considering that we're saying that Calvin Ridley is going to boost the wide receiver 1 more, and the wide receiver 2 is going to be boosted more by Christian Kirk. Someone kind of has to fall off somewhere. We can't say that's all going to be on the wide receiver 3. And we can't take that all away from Travis Etienne's production as well, because he's going to be receiving some passes in the backfield just as much. So for me, I think based on kind of the contract contingencies at this second in time, we're probably going to see a slight drawback in Evan Ingram's overall production, and perhaps he's a little bit overvalued. But I mean, hey, he's still a great buy. So for me, I'll probably take a couple dart throws on him. Just to kind of recap, there's not too much to talk about with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think we're all kind of consensus that this team is going to be very good barring injury. Trevor Lawrence got a massive wide receiver upgrade. The division's relatively easy. And there's a decent chance based on scheduling and everything that they actually win the AFC. I'd say that all these pieces are realistically properly valued. I don't think you're buying too high or buying too low on any specific facet. It really just depends on how the season comes together for them. Everything I'm hearing about Trevor Lawrence is he's looking amazing, he's in the right mindset, and that's exactly where we need him to be. He's got the right setup from an overall strength of schedule and win projection standpoint. I don't see a reality where we don't have Trevor Lawrence as a top 10 fantasy quarterback this year, if not top 5. My only concern for him is in the back half of the season. And to harp on that point specifically, it's just because I think they're going to start thinking a little bit more about playoffs earlier than other teams. I mean, week 17 isn't where they really do that, but there's a decent chance the Jags could do that. As always, drop your fantasy football questions down below. Let me know what you guys think. Drop a like, subscribe if you're enjoying this series. We'll be dropping a video on the Kansas City Chiefs tomorrow. As always, thanks for watching. Peace.